why should it be a sad event, right? We should be celebrating their life, not commiserating their death. And so with my granddad, that's what I wanted to do. And I kind of wanted to do something similar with my dad, right? I was like, why don't we put music on? Mum was like, no, right, it's not a party, this thing.
I want you to challenge. That's what I'm asking for. That makes me happy to be challenged, either to confirm my view or to challenge it.
I have that awareness that if I do a good job with influencing you in my argument, then a crack will appear in your thinking and you'll embrace that. With other people, then they're not entering that conversation to enlighten themselves. They're entering it to just create a barrier and prove me wrong.
Harry, how are we doing, buddy? Good to see you.
Yeah, good day, Nick. I'm doing well. I had a nice day actually at school, about an hour's drive from here. Nice kids, very nervous, but really engaged, and gave me some things to think about as well, maybe which we'll talk about today a little bit, but generally quite good. How about you?
Yeah, no, listen, it's good to hear you've had a good day. This is for those that are joining us on video or even on audio, hopefully it sounds a little bit better. We're moving up in the world of studio podcasting. So we've got a new software we're using today, trialing for the first time. So if you hear me clicking away, it's me trying to work out how to get the best out of this new posh software we're utilizing, but to help our listeners get better audio, better video, and for me, it's a gadget to play with. So I'm excited to play around with this tool today, using our listeners as guinea pigs. But I'm keen to find out how, you've been through a funeral since we last met. I know the last episode we talked about eulogy, celebrating life. I really enjoyed the conversation. We segued into stone tape therapy and all kinds of different directions. Who knows where today will go. But yeah, how was that, buddy? How'd it go?
I tell you what, it was weird. I mean, like the church, they had about like 200 people, which is quite, 150, 200 people. Quite a few of my friends were there, which was nice. My sisters and I all did a eulogy. We all got through it. It was all well received. Interestingly enough, I don't think I cried. But I felt like the way for me to get through it, especially because my sister's eulogies were both about a minute long and mine was about 5 minutes long. And I was telling 3 stories and 3 areas of my dad's life and a few stories within that. So it was quite long. So I had to make sure I held it together. And I did up until like maybe the last line where I kind of wobbled a little bit. But for me to get through it, I was saying to people afterwards, because they were saying, I don't know how you guys did that and how you got up there and did it for so long. And I was like, I think I was playing it like a movie. And I still feel like, I think I mentioned it before, I feel like I'm in a character in a movie at the moment. I still feel that way because I'm kind of just getting on with things. I mean, obviously my life is a little bit different now because, like, say, for example, my mum is in the next room and she's staying with me at the moment and there's all of that stuff going on. So it's not exactly like it was before, but I still feel like I was in a bit of a movie. So it was quite an intense day, but it was nice. It was really cold, but really sunny. A few people came to the burial, and then there was maybe like 60, 70 people at the house. And
full house.
Again, I thought
That's a lot.
Yeah, pretty full house. Yeah. And, I had a couple of little glasses of wine, but I thought I was going to like toast him with some whiskey and things. I just forgot and didn't get around to it. I was actually all right on the Friday. My sister was saying how she was actually physically ill, like fatigue, exhaustion, maybe even sick, just from the emotion of it all. But I generally, felt okay. And I think, like I say, part of it all comes down to, I feel that he had a nice, happy life. He died in as good a way as you could. I didn't have any regrets with my father and our relationship. I think it will hit me. I think I'm still in shock denial. So I don't think I'm in that stage where it's hitting me properly.
Yeah.
It will be. But, otherwise okay. And then, just got on with the weekend and today. But actually we had some tragic news yesterday as well. So my sister, her mother-in-law, who I think we told had leukemia, she passed on Sunday.
Sorry to hear that, buddy.
So exactly 4 weeks after my dad. I don't think they've told my niece yet because my brother-in-law is still in Cornwall, and I don't think my sister wants to be the one to tell her. And we're not sure how she's going to take it because now she's lost 2 grandparents in the space of a month, which is tough. Even though she knew that the other grandmother was unwell, and then obviously dad was a shock, and then she lost her other grandfather 6 years ago. So she's only got one grandparent left now. So yeah, so not great. I mean, obviously we knew it was coming. She was basically on no water and no food for like last few days. She wasn't able to do anything, and luckily her 3 children were there, and one of the children that came over from Australia flew over from Australia to be with her, and hopefully she's more at peace. But yeah, so
Yeah, well, I was going to say something then which would have sounded really inappropriate, but it depends how superstitious you are. So sometimes these things come in threes. I don't know if you're a 3 person, but my mum's ingrained that every time I have bad news, she always goes, "Oh no, I'm really worried for you because there's going to be something else that happens too." But how are you coping? Because that's a lot to take on. Emotions, you already said, I didn't cry. So that is there any? I don't know if there's any guilt or association there, but there's obviously a question. Sometimes these situations can bring out anger. They can bring out sadness, remorse, frustration, stress.
I think I'm going to embrace those later. I was having a pang of guilt as I was opening the front door because I was thinking this very thought. I was thinking, my dad has gone, right? And why, maybe I should be more in pieces. And I am to some degree, but I think I'm really going to notice it at those times that I really need him, right? In the every day, I'm kind of getting on with things, which is the way to do it. We've got a lot of admin type stuff to do. I've still got my work and job to do. But I was coming out of the car and I was thinking, I was feeling a bit guilt there. I was like, oh, maybe the guilt is now coming in because I'm like, now I'm guilty so I'm not guilty for the relationship we had, but maybe I'm guilty for not feeling the way I should be feeling.
I think that's the common one. That's the common one, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm just going to look. I'm just going to try and ride it out. I think I noticed points of frustration. Like yesterday, I was getting really frustrated with my printer, for example, in a way that I wouldn't normally have done. And it was only when I took a step back and I realized why it wasn't working. That's because my router got updated and it's a wireless route, blah, blah, and I had to just reconfigure it. And once I got that, but at one point I was like, because the printer's been playing up for months and I need to get a new one, I was, almost wanted to throw it. And then the other day I was trying to take my coat off and it was getting stuck on my watch. And I haven't done something like this before where I got frustrated and I just ripped it off. And I haven't done that really much. I haven't lost it in that way since I started meditating like 12 years ago. There's a few times. And that's when I'm like going for those periods of stress. So I was noticing that in myself, right? And again, coming back to this awareness piece, I was going, this I did, this I did, this I did. This is not usual behavior for me.
Yeah.
And this is the stuff coming into the fore,
I think it's quite interesting, right? And you bringing up those emotions and how you've been feeling frustration. It humanizes you. There must be people listen to this and go, this is a guy we listen to, every couple of weeks who is optimized every area of his life. Surely Harry never feels frustration or stress or any of these emotions. But the reality is, it doesn't matter how much you optimize certain things, right? We're all human at the end of it. And I bring this up because, with my dad's situation at the moment, and he's been back in hospital the last few days. The cancer spread now into kidneys and lung and liver. So, yeah, it's been quite emotional, and we're trying to get back and make sure we're spending as much time with him as possible, and hoping that he continues to fight and continues to go on. And going back to the story with my grandma, which I shared, I think, in one of our earlier episodes, where she was diagnosed with a brain tumor and given weeks to live, and then one day was violently sick on holiday when a family had taken her away to recover and came back and there was no trace of the brain tumor. I'm still living in that weird place of hope of going, you know what? I don't know how long he'll keep going, but he knows what could happen, right? We can't predict the future. That's one thing that's true. But we got into a conversation with a friend of mine about funerals. And it was interesting because you and I do this show and the friend listens, which is great. So hopefully he's probably listening to this now. And we ended up in a bit of a debate. That debate's unfair. We ended up talking, but it was interesting because their perspective was, because you and I do this show and we're deep into the world of mindfulness and awareness and trying to look at the positive side of things, that surely a funeral isn't something that I would necessarily want because they're all really depressing and they emphasize sadness, and that's not how you want your people to feel. So I should probably want to do something else. And it was interesting because it triggered me, and it was only because he used the word should, to be fair. You should do something else. And I was like, well, hold on. And as soon as he said the word should, I was like, actually, maybe now I definitely do want to do all the things you said, because I was like, God, I've got to be aware of my own sense of place here, because in one word, coming from a good place, which was, actually confirming that they'd listened to the show and we'd want to try to do different things. And that one word triggered me. And I think you saying there, you feeling frustrated and stressed, right? We're human at the end of the day, and we're dealing with raw emotions about loved ones. And it's okay.
Yeah, and it's all, I guess that the idea of should, where it's like, oh, I should be feeling this emotion, or I should be feeling guilt. And actually, I was speaking to a few of my friends whose fathers have passed, actually, unfortunately. One was at the kind of event that we did at the house afterwards. And I was asking him about, did you have, because we were talking about your friend, right? The one that had the 6 months later stuff going on. And I was mentioning that to him, because I was saying, like, I had obviously a heavy moment at the beginning. It's kind of tailed off a bit. And he was saying, well, now he's someone also who is deep into various practices, right? Black belt martial artist, yoga, breath work, Deepak Chopra stuff, meditation, all of that. Takes his kids to, Steiner schools, right? All this sort of stuff. So he's into all this stuff. And he was like, no, I never had like that kind of like massive like breakdown release or whatever. I just had this kind of tapering effect. It's been like 6 years for him, so who knows? Maybe there's something in the future that will happen. And I think we go through it all differently. But yeah, I guess this idea of like you should feel like this is interesting. When my gran passed, I actually did want to make it more of a celebration. I do feel like, why should it be a sad event, right? We should be celebrating their life, not commiserating their death. And so with my granddad, that's what I wanted to do. And I kind of wanted to do something similar with my dad, right? I was like, why don't we put music on? Why don't we do? My mum was like, no, right? It's not a party, this thing, right? So everyone, I mean, there's no rules to any of this, right? I don't think. Like, I think in certain cultures, they celebrate it a lot more, right? They celebrate the dead, like Day of the Dead in Mexico and all that. They celebrate it in a different way. So I don't think there's a right or wrong. But it is interesting what you talk about, where you're told what you should do. And then most people don't like being told what they should do. I often say that with my students when we're talking about feedback. When you're giving feedback to someone, rather than telling them you should stand up straight, you must project your voice, you have to do this. Most people don't like being told that. And maybe the invitation is, you could do this. You might like to try this. And it reminds me of a friend of mine who was talking about her mum, who was very good at getting the kids to do things. And she never actually asked them to do things, I don't think. And the idea was she was always asking questions. It was always in a question kind of way. Yeah, exactly. And it really strikes me, because I've often thought about that in the last decade or so, because I'm not naturally inclined to do that, but I often do. I go, oh yeah, have you considered it this way? Or what would happen if you do this? And it kind of works sometimes, it doesn't all the time, but it's about influence, right? It's like, how can you influence that person to do the thing you want to do? Because you can't control them. They can only control themselves. So you have to kind of put things in place that are going to influence them to do what you feel is best.
A few things to unpick in what you just said there. And the first bit I quite liked was the fact that you immediately have gone to other people who have been through a similar thing. And it's interesting how, as the human nature side of us falls back on, and goes back to your book, that social element, but also that tribal element as well, where we want to be around other people that have been through similar things. It makes us feel more at ease. It makes us feel more like we're part of that kind of community, and we can suffer together and celebrate together, kind of thing. And that kind of gives us more solace in a lot of instances. So I think that's the first thing I think I would do as well when I get to that situation. You'll probably be the first person I call, because you've just gone through it, and I'm going to be going through it at some point, right? So that was quite interesting. I think linking it to the should thing, I get equally triggered by people saying I should not. And that's exactly the same concept here. It's just being told what to do. But I think you were talking about dealing with the kids there, about sitting up straight. And there's a concept in coaching where, rather than having a goal we tend to create goals for ourselves, New Year's resolutions, whatever. I want to achieve X, Y, or Z. But there's a concept which says a goal is something to come from, not to go to. So in that instance, whether it's sitting up straight, you could start with a goal to come from, which is, and I know that you value security and health and vitality, things like that. As well, in 10 years' time, how would you like to present yourself as, let's go further. How would you like to present yourself as a pensioner? Would you like to be someone who is arched with their back, who's unable to stand up, or would you rather be able to stand proudly and have the vitality that you wanted? And then you work it back, and eventually you let the student come back to the idea that it all started when they started to slouch in their chair at school. And it's that realization of, not, they don't always understand. They stand up straight now because they're being told to, not because they believe in the reasons behind why you're asking them to do that thing. But when they're able to establish that for themselves, it changes the whole view. It becomes panoramic. It's like, okay, actually, I'm going to sit up straight for me, not for you, my teacher, but because I don't want to be that thing that you've just highlighted could become that thing if I don't address it now. And there's no should in there because you're coming up with the answers as a student. And I thought I like that way of thinking.
It's starting with the end. It's starting with the end in mind, right? And it's often what I think about. But also, to be clear, I'm not actually ever telling them to sit up straight or do anything. I use that as the example when I'm explaining why maybe they want to use different language rather than should or could. But often when I'm thinking about choices that I'm making, I think we've talked about this before, I'm often thinking about my future self, my self in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. But actually, massively classic mistake that happened yesterday. This is where I knew what was likely to happen. I ignored my future self anyway, and I regretted it this morning. So, I do like chocolate, as I've explained on the show before, but I'm usually reasonably strict with it in terms of when I have it and stuff. So yesterday, I was in Waitrose, I think, and I found this chocolate bar, which I really like, called an on bar, and then some biscuits. And I thought I was going to go back early enough to do some dinner and everything, and maybe have a little bit of chocolate with my mom because I wanted to give her a treat. But by the time she got back and by the time I sorted things out, it was quite late. And then I ate the chocolate knowing that it was past my curfew for chocolate, which is usually 5 o'clock, because anything after 5 o'clock, I know, although I don't tend to have too much trouble getting to sleep, I know my sleep will not have as much deep sleep when I have chocolate. And so I ate the chocolate anyway. And then I went on and ate some chocolate biscuits afterwards because I thought, well, why not? Right? I don't want to have it during the week, so I might as well get rid of it on Sunday. And I struggled, right? And I looked at my Oura ring today as well because I woke up and I was tired. Even though I went to bed at 10:30, I got up at 6. And I knew that I'd been in bed long enough, but I didn't have enough sleep. And I looked and my deep sleep was like maybe 45 minutes instead of the usual hour 20, hour 30. And so today on the way back from work, I had a long day and I was thinking, I really quite like to treat myself with a chocolate. And I was like, no, I'm not having another morning like I had this morning tomorrow. I can't be doing this. So even though I knew that it was going to be bad for my sleep, I still did it anyway. But I took that as a risk. Knowing.
But I think it's a good example, right? Two things. I know you're a big Tony Robbins fan, but he always advocates for taking ownership of things, right? So he would say you shouldn't say, I'm speaking for him here. I don't know if he's ever said this, but I imagine Tony Robbins would say, should isn't a good word to use because it lacks empowerment, it lacks assertiveness. So tonight you're probably going to say, I will or I must not have chocolate, or I will go to bed without chocolate. And that's way more empowering and assertive than I should not do it, because that kind of leaves some ambiguity. And actually should also, if I'm saying it to you, it kind of implies obligation or duty, right? So it's then not a choice or a desire. So yesterday there was no should involved. You made the choice, fully aware of the actions that are there. There was no I should not do this. It was actually, going back to Tony Robbins, it was an empowered choice to do it. And you took on the ramifications of that action as a result later on. And today you might move forward and go, well, as a result of that, I will go to bed without chocolate tonight, and that's fine. But I think should that word should is where we find guilt. It's where we find pressure. It's where all those kind of bad connotations and words start to come into our psyche. So if I say you should feel this way because you've done that, actually, why should I be creating that sense of guilt in you? Who am I to even make that assumption on you? You may have made that proactive decision, which you did. You know what? I'm going to eat chocolate. it's where I am. I need that distraction. I need that endorphin, whatever it is that you made that decision for. And today you have a Tony Robbins empowered decision to say, I will not do it tonight because I must get better sleep. And I think that's just way more powerful all in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even say I must not do it. I think what I do, again, is to take that out of the head altogether. So I said, like, if I feel the desire for something sweet later, and I have a backup, which is my mushroom hot chocolate. So it's a Rishi mushroom hot chocolate. And that basically just takes the edge off that desire for something chocolate, but it doesn't really affect my sleep or anything like that, which is good, or not in a negative way. I was actually listening to Tony Robbins in the car on the way home. He was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson, I think, and but he was talking about Warren Buffett. So Warren Buffett, for those not listening, I guess is known as the Sage of Omaha. He's like he's really good with stocks. He's now in his 90s. He's worth over 100 billion. Most of that net worth came after the age of 65, incidentally enough. He was talking about this example, and I often talk about this to my students when we do the public speaking, because Warren Buffett went to like this prestigious university, like I think it was Wharton Business School. And I remember an interviewer asking him once, why have you not got the Wharton Business School diploma on your desk behind you? A bit like I've got my one from my university here. And instead he had the certificate of attendance that he got from the Dale Carnegie School of Public Speaking. And he said, I've got that because actually that's brought me more money and more wealth than any of the other things that I've ever done. And Tony Robbins was talking about this exact example. So I was like, oh my God, I'm always talking about this to my students, because being able to communicate his ideas, being able to enroll people into his business, into his ventures, was way more important than getting that piece of paper at Wharton Business School. And so I was thinking about Dale Carnegie the other day. As you know, I think I gave How to Win Friends and Influence People for Teenage Girls to my niece, but I was thinking about a particular part of that book in the funeral. So we were talking off air a little bit about the funeral, and I was saying how going into it, I was a little bit apprehensive because sometimes you're, not just for the obvious reasons, but also you're interacting with lots of people that you haven't maybe seen or met for a long time, and family members, whatever. And sometimes, because I've got a very different way of thinking about things than maybe my more traditional outlook relatives, I was conscious of the fact that I didn't want to and I was thinking that Dale Carnegie is the best way of getting the best of an argument is not to have it at all.
Yeah.
And so I went in there very conscious, thinking I should probably not, right? This is me telling myself I should not spend so much time with these people, because otherwise inevitably what happens is it gets onto a conversation about something to do with my lifestyle.
It comes up and goes point scoring, doesn't it? It goes to point scoring.
Well, it's just because food is available, and then they'll see that I'm not eating that food, I'm having this food, and they go, oh, what are you doing this, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes into this whole spiral thing, and then I will start talking about whatever, like different podcasts or books I've read, and they'll be like, hey, no, that's tosh, whatever. And I'm like, so I don't want to get into any of that. Luckily, none of that happened because it was a bit of a blur that day anyway, and I made sure I didn't spend too long with those people. But it did get me thinking about, that idea of, stepping back and not having to win and not having to be the person that wins the argument, and that idea of the best of getting an argument, the way to get the best of an argument is not to have it, which is hard for some people, especially like myself, who can sometimes want to.
Well, you and I debate regularly, right? But I don't think we ever really border into argument. I think we have a healthy debate. I think, as you know, that book changed my life. I think it changed my mum's life. I mean, it was the first sort of book of that kind of teachings, principles, philosophies, whichever you want to look at it, I've ever given to my mum to read, which wasn't, usually we share fiction or whatever. And it changed her life. It changed the way that she viewed certain antagonizers in her life. And she was able to completely reframe, which we know is a very powerful tool that we both use regularly, reframe the way that she was with certain individuals or what things that they said. And I think it's made her life way more positive as a result, because she had some individuals that caused her challenges, and now she can reframe and avoid the argument, as you say, to get the best out of it. I think what really struck home for me in that, and actually was interesting, because you just gave a scenario where people are asking you lots of questions, which could have led you down the rabbit hole to talk about the way you live your life for however amount of time, but Dale Carnegie is quite clear in his book, same one. I've only read the one book. I've read two of his books, but How to Win Friends and Influence People was the the change you want. But he said in there, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. And I was like, whoa, okay. Now when you're at a party, and you see this all the time when you're watching dating shows or advice, the best way to really make a connection is to ask questions about other people and be interested in them rather than keep going, I did this, I did this, I did this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it reminds me of like something I used to say to my nieces and things, which is don't go out looking to make friends, right? Go out looking to be a good friend, and then you're going to have those friends anyway. And I think that's the thing. And I do remember that because I often would be someone that I can catch myself talking over talking, and when I became a bit more conscious, a bit more aware of things, I would then stop and ask the questions and ask the interesting questions about what they've said. Whereas what a lot of time people do, and we were talking about this before about this need for connection and this need for finding the commonalities. For example, one of the things that we often do, myself included, maybe less so now, but let's say, Nick, you've just said, oh, I've just been to, I don't know, Vietnam, right? For example, I actually, you have been to Vietnam, haven't you? Because you went cycling there many years ago, which started the whole thing. But let's say, and actually, maybe this happened actually when you said this to me, because at that time I was consciously thinking about my approach. So when you said, you met Helen and Ed and everyone in Vietnam, I'm pretty sure I would have now asked questions about that, like, oh, what was that cycling trip like, or what was the company that started that? Whereas my initial thought, and I think I even remember this, would be to say, oh, I've been to Vietnam. I was there for 3 weeks. So I don't even know if you know I've been to Vietnam or not, but I've been to Vietnam in 2000. But if someone says, oh, I've been to this holiday, you say, oh yeah, I've been, and this is what I did. And immediately you're taking the energy and you're taking the conversation from that person. Now, you don't mean to do that. The only reason you're saying you've been to that country as well is because you want to create that connection, that similarity, and blah, blah, blah. But really, you're taking their story away from them. And it's not malicious. It's not from a good place, but it's just lack of awareness. And when I realized that, I was like, oh, you know what? I do that all the time, not so much now.
I think I still do it all the time. People listening to this Novi are probably laughing now. It's something I have to be really consciously aware of. And as you say, it's about raising awareness. I definitely, if I do it, I catch myself every time, and I'm always able to revert back to finish off, to make sure that I go back to the question that was asked. And I'm always frustrated. What I probably don't do, and I probably, here's the word, must do is a better way of doing it, is identify it there and then and catch myself publicly rather than just in my head. But it's something I do. And it's, as you say, it comes from a good place, comes from a place of community, collaboration, just want a willingness to share experiences, because I know experiences lead to other conversations. But actually, it's an absolute sort of, coaching 101, right? You never ever listen with the intent to reply. That's the reality. It's just listen, to be interesting and to be interested. That's the thing. And I think sometimes that's why we get it wrong, is we can talk about ourselves. You're showing your interest, but perhaps not in the most effective way. But of course, you want to discord with someone, so it needs to be replaced.
Well, I mean, it's like a lot of. I'm listening to a podcast at the moment, which actually I might forward on to you. It's one of the Steve. Actually, I think you listened to him anyways. The Diary of the CEO.
Sometimes I'm not a huge fan. I'll be honest. If the guest is really powerful, I'll listen. But
yeah, it depends on the guest. The one I'm listening to now is a Harvard professor of leadership, but really it's about happiness. And I don't think it's going to teach you massively anything new, but it might be a good one to listen to then pass on to someone else to listen to, because it was talking about what we were talking about, right? Happiness being an inside job, and actually how it's not the goal itself, it's that kind of pursuit of the goal that leads to more happiness. Because when you get the goal that, whether you earn that first billion, suddenly you're like, oh, now I need to earn 2 billion, right? So he's talking about these sorts of things. So I thought it was quite a useful podcast to listen to, but I can't remember where I was going to go with that actually.
I'll tell you what, we can use that in the context of our conversations, because others may listen and think we argue. I would always say we never argue. I don't think we've ever argued. We just debate and have really good, interesting, from my perspective, conversations, right? And that's why we brought this podcast. Hopefully it's interesting to people that listen. But there's the idea that, which is bringing it back to Dale Carnegie. He says success is getting what you want, right? That would be an argumentative play between you and us. Happiness is wanting what you get. Now, what I want from you is your response, is your challenge. And I think I invite it, and I think you do back, because that's what we enjoy. It's not like we never, ever, I think, had a conversation where one has to win over the other. We just enjoy having a conversation about seeing different perspectives. So I think that's probably the difference between arguing with a friend, is really being determined in getting your way across over and above anything else. You need to win the argument in that context. But you can have a debate with a friend, which is just wanting what you get, having a conversation, trying to learn more, trying to discover different viewpoints, different perspectives, opening your awareness. I think that's very, very different, because contentment in that context of happiness comes from appreciating what you have anyway, and then learning and opening the mind to appreciating what others have. And yet for the all intents and purposes, someone outside of that conversation could think it's one thing. But between you and I'm speaking for you here, but that's my interpretation. I enjoy our conversations because I want you to challenge. That's what I'm asking for. That makes me happy to be challenged and to open my mind, either to confirm my view or to challenge it. Either way, I'm happy with either result.
Well, I think when I enter maybe a conversation with you in the past, I have that awareness that if I do a good job with influencing you in my argument, then a crack will appear in your thinking, and you'll embrace that. With other people, I know I don't even get into that conversation, because their mind is like they're not entering that conversation to enlighten themselves. They're entering it to just create a barrier and prove themselves, well, not even prove themselves right. It's more prove me wrong. And so I think it's a different debate when that happens. So it's knowing who you're jousting with, I guess, would be one of those things. But actually, speaking of influence, we talked about it before, but I think one of the books I read many years ago, which I did like on influence, was called Influence, 6 Principles of Persuasion or the Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, PhD. And in it, he talks about the 6 principles for persuading people to get things done. And what I like about this is not so much I use it for influencing other people, but I notice it when I'm being influenced. And I think it's really important, because I think there's been a lot happening, certainly in the last few years, where we have been, as a population, influenced to do certain things, whether it's social distancing or, line up for something or whatever. And the 6 principles are, and I was thinking about this one earlier, because you always get these, the Hari Krishna monks and things like that. They're always trying to give you something in the street. So the first one he's got is reciprocity, where you basically gift giving. We don't like to feel indebted to someone for something. So if someone gives you something, then you feel obliged to pay them back in some way. And so and we know this inherently, because a lot of the time we're walking past these people and we're like, oh no, I don't want it. Because as soon as you get it, you have to give them something back in return, which might be 5 minutes of your time or your email address or whatever. So that's one. The other one is consistency, which is interesting. So when people like to be consistent with what they have said in the past. So this is, in the sales world, it's always getting people to say yes often, right? Is your name Nick? Yes. Do you live here? Yes. And you've said about 50 yeses, and then by the time the question comes, you've been consistent with that. The other one, which has played a lot of part the last few years, is social proof, where, if we're uncertain how to behave or react, we look at others for their example. So then everyone is wearing a mask. We should be wearing a mask. Everyone is social distancing, and so on. The other one is liking. So we're more likely to agree to someone's request when we know, like, and trust them, which is what I talk about when it comes to learning good communication skills. Is that you're more likely to earn more money as a barber if you've got good communication skills, because you build that knowing, that liking, that trust with that person. They're more likely to buy, be upsold. And the other one is authority, which again is a big one the last few years, where if you've got someone in a white coat telling you something, okay, this is good for you, you should take this, you're more likely to be influenced by it than you're Bob the Builder guy next door saying, take this thing. And then the other one, the 6th one, is scarcity. So we're more likely to perceive something as more valuable when it's less available. They're the 6 principles, but it's an interesting book to read.
Well, it was interesting you mentioned the word monk, because I'm reading, it was recommended to me by a friend of mine called Sarah. I don't know if she listens to this or not, but if she does, thank you, Sarah, because I read it because of you. It's called I May Be Wrong, and Other Wisdoms from a Forest Monk. And you mentioned the word monk. I don't know. It's basically from Life as a Forest Monk. It's a Swedish guy who basically moved away to become a forest monk. He just felt it was his absolute internal calling. It is interesting. I'm going through the teachings now. It's about finding purpose, living in that kind of regime where completely outside of the context of his life and friends and the life he lived before, just had this internal calling. And actually, maybe that's why should was so prominent in my mindset earlier, because when the guy goes through this journey, everyone around him is saying he should or should not be doing certain things, right? And it was never about anybody else. It was his own internal journey, and he followed it because that's what he believed was right for him. And one of the things that
you have to.
But most people, you say you have to, actually, Harry, and I say, of course you do, maybe too flippantly. A lot of people don't listen to themselves. They don't listen to that internal calling. We push it down and we ignore it because we think we shouldn't. I mean, we talked last time, I know you've got a point to raise, but we talked last time about purpose. And one of the questions I said in the 6 questions I'll ask my clients is, what would you do if you had all the approval in the world? Many people don't do those things because they seek the approval of their partner, their parents, that they'll be frowned upon if they suddenly quit their job, packed up and moved to Vietnam. Or actually, if you were to do that, you could probably have a way better way of life in different elements. We'll go back to what Tim Ferriss says, and we talked about this before. If you want to live by the beach and sip cocktails all day, you can do that tomorrow. But you just can't do it in the UK or in America. You've got to go and live in the Philippines or somewhere where it's more affordable. You can have any life you want. You just have to be flexible to go and achieve it. So if you've got that calling, listen to it. And I only jumped in there because you said we have to, and I went, of course we do. And actually, I would say probably, I don't know what the percentage of the population don't, but many, many people don't listen to that calling at all.
Yeah, I guess when I say you have to, it is right. People don't listen to that. And I think when you were talking about that example, the guy going off to be a monk and people saying, well, you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that. What jumped into my head is, again, a quote that I've used in the past in this podcast, which is one that I think about, one I mentioned even to my mum the other day, which is that Bruce Lee quote that I love, where he says, to the reporter, I haven't been put on this earth to live up to your expectations. You haven't been put on this earth to live up to mine. And I think about that quote often. I like Bruce Lee's quotes. I think he was a philosopher first and martial artist second, because there were certain expectations that people put on me, even in the last few days, about certain things. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not here to live up to your expectations about who I should be in this kind of capacity. I've got to be me, right? I've got to be me. Right? As Bob Proctor said, if I've got to be me, I've got to be free, or something like that, something along those lines. And actually, one of the top tips we give our students when it comes to public speaking, the first one is be yourself.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to try and be someone else. Because again, part of it's about looking inward. If we want to go really deep into this, it's about being able to sit with yourself, discover who you are. And in terms of public speaking, what we're talking about really is being your authentic self and speaking as you rather than as you think that the audience should hear you, because you don't really know what they want anyway. And I say it's hard enough as a teenager trying to work out who you want to be in life. You don't need to complicate it by being someone else. And a lot of us are not our true selves. I don't think anyway. And I count myself in this. I think I'm definitely edging closer towards that with every, journey that I'm taking along this path. I don't know what our true selves are. Maybe our true selves are, spiritual. As Wayne Dyer says, we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yeah, nice.
And I think when we really embrace that, I honestly feel that. And I think maybe that is part of why I'm able to cope with the death of my father in the way that I am currently, is because I don't believe currently the 3-dimensional reality is all that there is. And I do have this idea that we are spiritual beings having a temporary human experience. And so therefore the spirit of that person that I knew as my dad lives on elsewhere. And I think we've talked about ayahuasca before, and I've said that ayahuasca, DMT, dimethyltryptophan, in the brain is in its maximum amount at birth and death, which is why they call it the spirit molecule, because they believe that's when the spirit enters the body and then exits, why you have a lot of DMT. And then when you take ayahuasca or have DMT experiences, you have transcendental experiences and other realm experiences a lot of the time, because you have that influx of DMT in your system. You're able to traverse the reality that we see here today. I don't know how much of this is real or true, but
It was interesting. We spoke when you lost your dad at the start, and you said, when you went to see the body, the spirit had left it, and it was an interesting experience. And I said to you at the time that it's something that I don't plan to do if I have the opportunity, because my mum gave a similar account that that's the memory that for her she was left with when she saw my dad's parents when they passed. And it's like, but actually, from the way you've described it, you've given me a positive, whatever, I don't know what decision I'll make when the day comes, because sometimes curiosity or I might be compelled or whatever it is to take that last look, knowing it's the last time I get a chance to do so. But actually, the way you put it there is, it's almost a nice thing. Although the spirit's left the body, it makes you potentially be more aware that maybe there is a spirit that lives on because it's left the body. I don't know. There's something beautiful in what in that visualization I've created for myself now in listening to go, you know what? There's a bit of me that wants to see that spirit leave, because I can say goodbye to the body knowing the spirit's still with me. And maybe I need to see that to get that perspective on things. I'll only know at the time. But I'd only ever seen the negative in the situation because of the way it had been framed, and reframing it for myself based on the version you've given gives it a different feeling to, if I do ever see anyone I love now, or have the opportunity to do it, maybe it's a positive thing to say, okay, I'm seeing you now, and I want to know, I want that feeling to be confirmed in me that the spirit lives on because it's left your body, and that's cool, right? That's going to be by my side. I don't know. I'm not there yet, but I think it's.
I guess decide on the time. I mean, like for me, like with my dad last week, my mum was like, she was going to go to the funeral directors and see the body in the suit and everything else. I keep saying the body rather than my dad because, like I said, that wasn't my dad. That was the vessel he was using. But I did, and she said, "Oh, do you want to come or anything, or leave a note in the pocket or anything like that?" Because my sister was going to leave a note in the pocket, and I thought, no, I said my goodbye in the room that time, and also I just remember. I mean, I remember I kissed his forehead, and I knew it would be cold anyway. The body goes cold really quickly as soon as the body dies, really. But for me, when I went. Now I'm a little bit more kind of spiritually minded than I was when my gran died in 2010. But I remember going into that room, not having a thought about it. I was there at 3 a.m. because I was taking my mum there, and we'd had the call, and so I rushed there. But as soon as I walked in, I felt the spirit was not within, like that. It was just so obvious to me. It was so obvious that was not my gran. It was like. It was just like a show. It's like you seeing your dad or your mum driving the car, and then they get out of the car and you look at the car and you're still thinking that the car is your mum. It's not. It was always your mum in the car driving, and then your mum is somewhere else now. And it was just as obvious as that to me. But that was just to me. I don't know other people what they will interpret by that. But it gives me comfort, I guess. And maybe you could argue, oh well, it is what it is, like you're just imagining whatever you're imagining. But remember, I don't know if you remember, but the word spirit, I believe, if I'm correct, is Latin for breath. Okay, so it's literally breath. So when the spirit leaves the body, it's the breath is leaving the body, right? The breath is the spirit. This is why I talk about that we're all one as well, because we all share the same breath. This is one of the lessons that I hoped was going to become obvious during COVID. But I don't think it was in the end, is that we were all connected because we were all sharing our common breath, our common spirit. We're all coming from the same thing. And have you read Conversations with God, by the way?
Not Conversations with God, no. Bear in mind, your book list is extensive to say the least. It's about 300 ahead of me. But
well, I don't read as much anymore. I just read a book a week for about 2 or 3 years. So that was
trust me, if you're listening to this, Harry once sent me his book list. He's categorized it, and there must have been a best part of 1,000 titles. So certainly felt that way.
Yeah, there's a few. I try not to send it to too many people because they get overwhelmed with that. But Conversations with God, it talks about. Neil Donald Walsh, I think, is the author, and he talks about his experience with interacting with the sensation that he calls God, but not God as in like this guy up in the sky, beard, whatever. But I like to call God God, the grand overall design. But whatever you want to describe it, the universe, God. But he was talking about remembering and the idea of remember who you are, and remember as in put back together. And I think the way I try to describe it to people is that we are all leaves on a tree thinking we're just leaves, without realizing if we go back far enough, the branches come together. It's all part of the roots and everything else. And I think when we realize that actually we are all connected, we are all one through that breath, literally through that breath, right? Every breath that we take, we're breathing in molecules and particles of Marilyn Monroe and Alexander the Great and all these people. We
as
don't
well.
realize.
Just quoted
and I thought that was going to become
every
obvious.
breath you take. I just for me, it immediately took me to Sting's song.
Yeah,
you're quoting every other musician except him.
People don't get how connected we are. And I thought we got that during COVID because that was literally the way that it was being transmitted. It was like through our common breath. But our breath is the spirit, because literally the word breath and spirit mean the same thing. So I try to explain it that way. And so when the breath leaves the body, the spirit has left.
The nice thing about the leaf example that you've given there is when the leaf falls off the tree, right, it falls back down to the earth. It gets, eventually it fertilizes the earth to sprout new trees, right? It's cyclical, like anything. If you whether you think about Buddhist teachings or whatever, the idea that everything then supports the next, we cycle the way of life by fertilizing the next thing that goes around, right? I quite like that as a visual.
Circle of life, and how everything is a circle, like whether it's spring, summer, autumn, winter, and how when you're in that winter, if you know that it's a cycle, you can cope with that winter period of your life or the economy better because you know spring is coming. And it's like everything in the universe, right? Now we've heard of the Big Bang, there may well be a big crunch. That's indeed if we think what's happening. So we might be one of multitude of cycles of our universe. So I do think the idea of the cycle of life is comforting, right? Whether that includes reincarnation, I think that might be another conversation for another time. But I think for me, it gives comfort knowing that things work in cycles. Like even you have to look at birth and death, right? When you're born, you're a baby, you're pooping in your pants and needing people to look after you. And then as you get an adult, you go back to that as well. So it's a big cycle. Yeah. It's just a big cycle.
No, fair. Well, my dad thought Benjamin Button was a true story when he was watching that. He was halfway through the movie and he went, "Is this a true story?" And I was about to say, when you were talking about your circle of life idea, and you've got some, let's be fair, you're very open-minded, shall we say, about anything, whether there's aliens and UFO sightings, everything else. But it was, I think it's Dale Carnegie, if we bring it back full circle, talking about the circle of life, the circle of this episode. He says that any fool can criticize, condemn, and complain, and most fools do. And it's very easy. And then when someone says you should do something, you should not do this, or why have you done this? And, why is an inherently an antagonistic question in itself. But it's so easy for someone to question when really I'll go back to, it's an external reflection of how they feel inside, right? When often they get these aggressive questions that come in, usually it sits because there's something inside them that hasn't been fully answered and they're trying to understand it, but it comes out often aggressive. And to be closed off, I read a quote last episode from Letting Go about the higher level of scoring between an atheist and a non-atheist. An atheist just categorically saying something doesn't exist immediately lowers the ability to be open-minded about other things. And I'm not necessarily here to criticize atheists necessarily, but I just believe it's you can show more empathy and understanding to someone, whether you are or you're not, by just being open-minded. And I think, I do another podcast called the HR L&D podcast. And the question I ask at the end of every show is, what are the behaviors that you see in every great leader you've ever worked with? And by far the most popular answer is empathy. And with empathy, it requires understanding and listening and not judging necessarily. And I think sometimes when you use words like why, should, or should not, or you're talking about spirits and reincarnation, circle of life, whatever it is, I just think it limits our ability to show empathy and compassion and to be, just to be aware and being open-minded. I just think it's a really positive trait to have in someone.
It reminds me of something I say to people, and I usually have to explain it because I think it gets lost on people, but people often talk about, walking a mile in someone else's shoes. But then I say, in order to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, you have to take yours off first. That means, you have to remove those beliefs, those preconceived ideas, those judgments, in order to really embrace that other person's way of being and belief. And it's really hard to do because we have our preconceived ideas, our biases, and so on. I think obviously, like we talk about, awareness being the first stage. So when you're aware that we have biases, I have certain biases. I do try to eliminate those to some degree. I was saying to my mum, because often people associate the way I eat, for example. I know we haven't done a podcast yet about food, but the way I eat being very different from maybe the average person on the street. But most of the podcasts I listen to, most of the books I listen to are health advocates who are following a very different path to what I am, because I don't want to just listen to the people that reinforce my ideas. I feel like when you get a balance, when you get as much of a view as possible, and when you're quite in tune with yourself, you can discern what is right for you at a certain particular point in time, and that may well change over time anyway, rather than relying on experts. Like we were talking about influence and Robert Cialdini, right? Being influenced by experts, because this is why I say it's actually a good book, not necessarily because I'm able to influence others, but because I'm noticing when others are trying to influence me. So if I see that, that doctor on TV saying, well, you know what, everyone else is taking this thing and you should take it. And if you don't, you're an absolute travesty to humanity. I'm thinking that's actually not influencing me too much in a way, right? I know that they're using this idea of authority. I know that they're using this idea of social status, or whatever the term was that he used, social proof. So I know that you're using this. That's not going to influence me. What's going to influence me is me looking at the facts that I've got in front of me and discerning what I believe to be the right course of action for me personally. That's what's going to influence me.
100%. I mean, well, two things I'll pick up on there before we close the show. One is we both subscribe to What the Doctors Don't Tell You, right? And I came across that publication after coming to your house and reading it, and I find it fascinating. And I think that's interesting because it does go against status quo, does go against the white coat way of influencing in certain areas, and just allows you to be more open-minded to, I don't know, Eastern medicines rather than always Western medicines, and just other ways of doing things, and looking at plants instead of, pharmaceuticals or whatever. So that's something that, as a little plug for them, I don't even know, I don't know them, but I found publication coming to your house, and I find it just interesting, just raises my awareness. It just keeps me open-minded to other solutions. Right?
You don't have to believe everything in there. Like, I sometimes find that they're a bit inconsistent, and that's the point, is just because you read a book or just because you know a person, it doesn't mean you agree with everything that person has ever said in their lives, right? It's like you can take that information and it yourself.
It leads me to what I was going to say, because you mentioned food, right? And to bring it full circle with Dale Carnegie, he's got a brilliant quote which says, "If you want to gather honey, don't kick over the beehive." So if I want to get to grips with the best parts of the way that you live your life, right, I don't want to come in against, up to you and say, "Why do you do this, Harry? Why don't you do that? You should be doing this." I just want to know what's really worked for you. If you could narrow it down, what are the 5 top things that you found have really had a difference in your life? How do I go about making that smoothie? What can I do in my life that is cost effective, that might just give me more vitality, might make me sleep better? I want to learn from you. That doesn't mean I have to adopt everything that you've done. But if I tackle it by kicking over the beehive and just demanding certain things, it's going to antagonize you. You're going to close up immediately and not want to give me anything. And I don't, maybe that's the success piece. I might come away from that thinking I've been successful because I got Harry to close up. But there's no happiness in that. There's no awareness. There's no win for anybody, really. And again, leaning on the Dale Carnegie sort of school of influence and thinking. But I want to understand and then make my own choices as to which parts of the bits of your puzzle that I want to impart on my life, and go, you know what, that could really work in my life. A weighted blanket being a great example that, you mentioned it. I didn't have one, wasn't sure if it would work. My wife listened to it, bought it. It's one of the best things that I've ever had that's helped with my sleep. I remain very open-minded to any of these things. And it's up to us to make those choices rather than to kick you for the top 10.
You don't have to, exactly, right? You don't have to kick the whole beehive over, as you said. And again, we're going full circle again, because I'm going to go back to a Bruce Lee quote, one of the ones I use in the book, which is, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely yours. Just because I like Tony Robbins in some things he says, it doesn't mean that I think he's the bee's knees in everything. And
you do
this
everything.
Is where people go, "Oh, you look at that person, or you read this person, and you must be this." And it's like, are you that stupid that you think that everyone believes everything that anyone has ever said? Like, No, like I've got friends that I don't agree with on something. If we all agreed on everything, we'd all live in the same house, have the same job, have the same haircut, do the same thing. We have to have these differences, and we don't need to take everything on board from even our most trusted people. We just take what's useful, right? You've taken the weighted blanket, you've taken the subscription to the magazine, great, right? And I've taken things from you, and I've taken things from other people, and you don't have to agree with 100%, right? You just want to take what's useful and adapt it
to help us to grow. Right. And I could tell you I am, I can tell you I'm not, but neither can be true. It depends on how you want to take that information, right? You use it in any way you want to use it, and that's absolutely fine. Hopefully that's what this podcast does, gets people thinking, and maybe they go, you know what? I love that quote Harry's just said. I'm going to use that in my life. Or, you know what? I didn't cry straight away either, and I felt guilty for it. And this is a vitality expert feeling the same way. It's okay. We just want to share how we feel, work our way through our own problems day to day, and try and lean on the teachings and the things that we've discovered on our own journeys that have helped us. Now, Harry's way further down the path than potentially I am in some aspects of the health vitality stage, but we don't compete. I know there's things in my life that I can support you with, and I know there's things in your life that hopefully you can support me, and I think that's where our friendship blossoms really. And hopefully it's helping the listeners to find their own path as well. Probably a good way to close today's show.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's been good. We've had a couple of teething problems with the new software, but hopefully that may have not been anything to do with the software. Maybe my internet connection dropped, or someone's dropped somewhere along the line. Who knows? But yeah, it's been really nice chatting as ever. I really enjoy these chats, and I approach these often as that conversation that I'm having with you, and just hoping that people listening in are feeling part of that conversation and able to just pick from those conversations we have the bits that are useful for them and help them in some way. So thank you for listening, everybody that does listen.
Good to chat to you as always, Harry, and we'll bring you the next episode. Cheers, Harry.
All right, take care, buddy.